Husband divorces his wife, calling her useless. 3 months later, at his wedding to the CEO's daughter, she walks in. Turns out, she's not just his ex-wife. She's a real owner of the company he's been working at for 8 years. She owns everything, and she's about to destroy him in front of everyone. Before we dive in, drop a comment. What time is it and where are you watching from? Let's start. The divorce papers landed on the kitchen table like a slap. Margaret stared at them. Her husband Brandon stood across from her, arms crossed, chin high. He looked proud. Happy, even. Sign them, he said. Margaret's hands shook as she picked up the pen. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of cooking his meals, ironing his shirts, attending his boring company parties. 10 years of being called Brandon's quiet little wife. You're useless, Margaret, Brandon said, his voice cold. You've never contributed anything to this marriage. No job, no money, nothing. You just sit at home all day doing what exactly? Margaret said nothing. She just signed her name at the bottom of the paper. Brandon smiled. Good. I need someone who matches my success. Someone impressive. Jessica Palmer is everything you're not. Beautiful, connected, powerful. Her father owns half the companies in London. Margaret handed him the papers. Her face was calm. Too calm. Is that all? She asked softly. One more thing, Brandon said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. This is an invitation. To my wedding. 3 months from now. The Grand View Hotel. Everyone who matters will be there. The board of directors from Titan Industries, the CEO, the shareholders. It'll be the biggest event of the year. Margaret took the invitation. She looked at the gold lettering, the fancy script, the picture of Brandon and Jessica, smiling like they'd already won. Why are you inviting me to your wedding? Margaret asked. Brandon laughed. Because I want you to see what real success looks like. I want you to watch me marry into the Palmer family. Jessica's father, Robert Palmer, is the CEO of Titan Industries. When I marry Jessica, I become part of that world. I'll finally get the executive position I deserve. You held me back for too long, Margaret. Now you can watch me rise. Margaret nodded slowly. I'll be there. Brandon looked surprised. Really? Yes, Margaret said. I wouldn't miss it. Brandon shrugged. Suit yourself. Just don't embarrass me by crying or making a scene. Wear something nice. Try to look like you belong, even though we both know you don't. He left. The door slammed behind him. Margaret sat alone in the empty kitchen. Then, for the first time in hours, she smiled. A real smile. Sharp. Dangerous. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. Robert, she said when a man answered. It's Margaret. Brandon just gave me the divorce papers. About time, Robert Palmer said on the other end. Are we still going ahead with the plan? Yes, Margaret said. He invited me to the wedding. He wants me to watch him win. Robert laughed. The fool. He has no idea, does he? None, Margaret said. He still thinks you're just Jessica's father. He doesn't know the truth. And he won't, Robert said. Not until it's too late. Everything is ready on my end. The board members will all be there. They're excited to finally meet the real owner of Titan Industries. Margaret's smile grew wider. Perfect. Let him have his moment. Let him think he's won. The fall will hurt more that way. She hung up and walked to her bedroom. From the back of her closet, she pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were papers, legal documents, contracts, proof of ownership. Titan Industries, the company Brandon had worked at for 8 years, the company he dreamed of running, didn't belong to Robert Palmer. It belonged to Margaret Rivers. She bought it 12 years ago, before she even met Brandon, back when she was Margaret Chun, a brilliant investor who turned a small inheritance into millions. She'd built an empire in silence, using fake names and shell companies to hide her identity. Robert Palmer was just a face she hired to run things while she stayed invisible. When she married Brandon, she never told him. She wanted to see if he loved her for who she was, not what she owned. He failed the test. For 10 years, she watched him chase promotions at her own company. She watched him bow to Robert Palmer, begging for opportunities. She watched and complain about how the CEO doesn't appreciate real talent. Brandon never knew the CEO worked for his wife. And now, he was about to marry the CEO's daughter, a woman who was also part of Margaret's plan. Jessica knew the truth. She agreed to play along because Margaret promised her a fortune and freedom from her controlling father's image. But Brandon knew nothing. Margaret closed the box and put it back in the closet. She had 3 months to prepare. 3 months to watch Brandon plan his perfect day. 3 months to let him believe he'd finally escaped his useless wife. Then, at his wedding, in front of everyone he wanted to impress, Margaret would show him the truth. She would show him that the power he'd been chasing for years had been sleeping beside him all along. She would show him that the wife he threw away owned everything he loved, and she would take it all back. Margaret walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Brandon was celebrating his freedom, probably buying champagne, probably calling his friends to brag about his upcoming wedding to Jessica Palmer. Let him celebrate. Let him dream. Margaret would be patient. She'd been patient for 10 years. She could wait 3 more months. The wedding invitation sat on the table, gold letters shining in the light. Margaret picked it up and ran her finger over Brandon's name. "See you soon, darling," she whispered. Then she threw the invitation in the trash. She didn't need it. She owned the hotel. He stood at the altar in his black tuxedo with a silver tie, grinning like a king. The Grandview Hotel ballroom sparkled with 1,000 lights. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. White roses covered every table. A string quartet played soft music. Everyone important was there. The entire board of directors from Titan Industries sat in the front rows. Executives, shareholders, business partners. They all came to see Brandon Rivers marry Jessica Palmer, the CEO's daughter. Brandon felt unstoppable. "Today, I become somebody," he whispered to his best man. "Today, everything changes." Jessica walked down the aisle in her white wedding gown covered in crystal beading. She looked beautiful. Cold, but beautiful. Brandon didn't notice the cold part. He only saw his ticket, the power walking toward him. The ceremony began. "Dearly beloved," the priest said, "we are gathered here today." Brandon's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. "Excuse me," Brandon muttered. He pulled out his phone. 15 missed calls. All from his office. All from his boss. His stomach dropped. "I need to take this," he told the priest. 1 second. He walked to the side of the altar and answered. "Hello?" "Brandon," his boss shouted. "Where are you?" "At my wedding." "What's wrong?" "The board just had an emergency meeting. They're removing you from the company." Brandon's blood turned to ice. "What? Why?" "They said you're not needed anymore. They said," his boss paused. "They said the real owner is tired of carrying dead weight." "The real owner?" Brandon laughed nervously. "Robert Palmer is here at my wedding. He's about to become my father-in-law. This is a mistake." "It's not Robert Palmer, Brandon," his boss said quietly. "It never was." The phone went dead. Brandon stood frozen. The guests were staring at him. Jessica was staring at him. The priest looked confused. Then the ballroom doors opened. Everyone turned. A woman walked in. She wore a navy blue silk dress, simple but elegant. Her hair was pulled back. No jewelry. No makeup. She didn't need any. Margaret Rivers walked down the aisle like she owned the place. Because she did. The room went silent. Brandon's face turned white. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" Margaret didn't answer. She walked straight to the front and stood next to Robert Palmer. Robert stood up and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I'd like to introduce you to the true owner of Titan Industries, the woman who built this company from nothing, the woman who's been running everything behind the scenes for 12 years. He gestured to Margaret Rivers. The room exploded with whispers. Brandon stumbled backward. No, that's impossible. You're lying." Margaret finally looked at him. Her eyes were calm, empty of emotion. "Hello, Brandon," she said softly. "This is insane." Brandon shouted. "She's nobody." She's just a housewife. She doesn't even have a job. One of the board members stood up. Mr. Rivers, I reported to Mrs. Rivers for 8 years. Every decision you thought Robert made, she made it. Every promotion you begged for, she denied it. Another executive stood. The office you worked in, she owns the building. Another, the car you drive, company car, her company. Another, your salary, she signed every check. Brandon looked at Jessica. Tell them this is crazy. Jessica stepped back, away from the altar. I'm sorry, Brandon. I tried to warn you. Warn me? Brandon's voice cracked. You're supposed to marry me. My father doesn't own Titan Industries, Jessica said. He never did. He's just an employee. Margaret hired him to be the public face while she stayed hidden. I've known for years. She pulled off her wedding veil. This was never real, Brandon. Margaret paid me to play along, to give you exactly what you wanted, a rich, connected wife. She wanted to see how far your greed would take you. Brandon turned to Margaret. His hands were shaking. Why? Why would you do this to me? Margaret stepped closer. You called me useless, Brandon. You said I contributed nothing. You threw away 10 years like they meant nothing. Her voice was quiet, but everyone heard it. So I decided to show you what nothing really looks like. She nodded to Robert. Robert held up a document. As of this morning, Brandon Rivers is officially terminated from Titan Industries. No severance. No references. Security has already cleared out your desk. Brandon fell to his knees. Please, Margaret, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I was wrong. Please don't do this. Margaret looked down at him. You're right about one thing, Brandon. You are sorry. She turned to the board members. Gentlemen, let's go. We have real work to do. The entire board stood up and followed Margaret toward the exit. The guests sat in shocked silence. Jessica grabbed her dress and ran after Margaret. Wait, you promised me my payment. Margaret stopped and pulled an envelope from her purse. Here, 50,000 pounds. As agreed. Thank you for your performance. Jessica took the money and disappeared. Brandon was alone at the altar. The priest awkwardly closed his Bible. I think the ceremony is over. Guests began to leave, whispering, laughing, taking pictures. Brandon stayed on his knees, watching Margaret walk away. She never looked back. The ballroom emptied. The string quartet packed their instruments. The waiters started cleaning tables. The beautiful white roses that cost thousands of pounds suddenly looked like funeral flowers. Finally, Brandon stood up. His legs felt weak. His silver tie hung loose around his neck. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. I need to sue someone, Brandon said. My ex-wife just ruined my wedding. She sabotaged my career. There has to be something illegal about this. His lawyer sighed. Brandon, I saw the video. It's already all over the internet. 10 million views in the last hour. Everyone's calling you the fool who divorced his boss. Brandon's heart sank. Video? What video? Someone recorded the whole thing. Margaret revealing she owns the company. The board members standing up. You begging on your knees. It's everywhere. Brandon hung up. He checked social media. His name was trending. The comments were brutal. Imagine divorcing someone because they're useless and then finding out they own everything you have. This man really called his boss useless for 10 years and didn't even know it. The fact that she stayed quiet for 10 years just to destroy him at his own wedding is legendary. Brandon threw his phone across the room. He called Robert Palmer next. Maybe he could fix this. Maybe there was still a chance. Robert, please, Brandon said. I know I made mistakes, but I'm talented. I've worked hard for 8 years. Surely Margaret can forgive me. Surely we can work something out. Robert laughed, not a friendly laugh, a cold one. Brandon, you spent 8 years kissing up to me, thinking I had power. But every time you insulted Margaret at a company party, every time you made jokes about her being just a housewife, every time you complained that she was holding you back, I reported it all to her. You weren't just rude to your wife. You were rude to the owner of the company. Did you really think there was a way back from that? The line went dead. Brandon tried calling the other board members. None of them answered. He tried calling business contacts, people who used to return his calls immediately. Now, nothing. He was invisible, just like he'd made Margaret feel for 10 years. Brandon went home to his apartment, the apartment Margaret had paid for through their marriage. The locks were changed. A note was taped to the door. Lease terminated. Property of Rivers Investment Group. Please vacate immediately. Rivers Investment Group, Margaret's company. Brandon had nowhere to go. He called his brother and begged for a place to stay. He called old friends. Most didn't answer. The ones who did made excuses. Nobody wanted to be associated with the man who humiliated himself in front of Britain's business elite. 3 days later, Brandon sat in a cheap motel room. He'd sold his watch to pay for it. His company car was repossessed. His credit cards were declined. They were all linked to accounts Margaret had controlled. He had nothing. Everything he thought was his had always been hers. His phone buzzed. One last message. From Margaret. It read, "You said I contributed nothing. I hope you enjoy everything that nothing left you with. Good luck, Brandon. You'll need it." Brandon stared at the message for a long time. Then he finally understood. Margaret had never been useless. She'd been invisible by choice. She'd watched him, tested him, given him every chance to see her, really see her as a partner. He failed every test, and now he was paying the price. Meanwhile, Margaret sat in her office at Titan Industries, her real office, the one at the top floor that Brandon never knew existed. Robert knocked and entered. The board wants to know what's next. Margaret looked out the window at the city below. Next, we expand. I've been quiet long enough. It's time to step into the light. No more hiding? Robert asked. No more hiding, Margaret confirmed. I built this empire in silence. Now I want the world to know who really runs things. Robert smiled. What about Brandon? Margaret thought for a moment. Brandon made his choices. He'll have to live with them. I'm done carrying people who refuse to see my worth. She turned back to her desk, to her work, to the empire she'd built with her own hands. Brandon was already forgotten. The end. The lesson. Margaret's story teaches us something powerful. Real power doesn't need to shout. People who underestimate quiet strength often pay the highest price. Brandon thought silence meant weakness. He thought the person who cooked his meals and attended his parties had nothing to offer. He never looked deeper. True power recognizes power. Margaret didn't need a fancy title or a loud voice to build an empire. She worked in the shadows, made smart decisions, and let others take the credit, until the moment she decided to take it back. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect costs everything. Brandon lost his job, his reputation, his wedding, and his future, all because he couldn't respect a woman who gave him 10 years of her life. Your turn. What would you do in Margaret's position? If someone dismissed everything you contributed, would you stay quiet or would you prove them wrong? Have you ever been underestimated? How did you handle it? Share this story with someone who needs a reminder. The quietest person in the room might be the most powerful one there. Never judge someone's worth by how much noise they make. Drop a comment below telling us. What moment in Margaret's revenge impressed you the most? Was it the wedding reveal, the board members standing up, or her final message to Brandon? If this story inspired you, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Everyone needs to hear that being underestimated isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of your greatest comeback. Remember, power doesn't announce itself. It simply is. What's your story? We'd love to hear it. Comment below. Backhand index pointing down.